Hey guys, how you doing? Luna here with a new video for the channel. Today I have one of the most important tracks in my entire life. One of the hardest things I have ever done. One of the most painful things I have ever done. Something that I never thought I will be doing again. And that is checking out Drake's entire discography once again. Because today we're going to be ranking every single album from worst to best. Not only the albums, we're counting every single project that Drake has released. So yes, those demo tapes from 2007 and 2006 are included. I'm just kidding. I'm not including those mixtapes. No one wants to talk about them. So we're starting from So Far Gone, and we're letting it off at Honestly Nevermind. But before we do that, please remember that this is only my personal opinion. So if you have your own, go ahead and leave it down below in the comments. I'm pretty sure everyone wants to see your comments down below. So go ahead, give it a try. With that being said, let's go on with number 10. Certified Loverboy has, the debatable honor of being the worst project ever released by Drake, if we exclude the 2006 and 2007 mixtapes. And the reason why is because, I think that ever since Views, Drake adopted a formula that it was based on not giving a fuck for 20 plus tracks. And this album is like the best example of it. I believe that most of the songs here are boring, generic, not well written, has some really questionable pen game on this album. Some of Drake's worst bars are on this album. You have, for example, that line about Drake being a lesbian. I think that everyone knows that one on Girls Like Girls. And we also have Drake acting like we don't remember shit. For example, saying in the song Champagne Poetry, I remained unfazed, worse has been done. Yeah, dude, you do remember that 3 years before you got absolutely humiliated by Pusha T, right? Don't get me wrong, not all the songs are horrible. I am willing to say that Knife Talk is a really good song, but even that song, it's a good song because of the features more than anything. Actually, when Drake comes along, he sounds dead. It's still a good track, but I'm just trying to say that Drake doesn't give a fuck to do anything, with passion on this album. And the consequence of that is this being his worst album by far. This is definitely an album that you want to skip. So yeah, number 10, this album is just, it's a painful listen. Maybe if you're a bit nostalgic, you can be tricked into thinking that this was actually a good album. Not only that, but I'm willing to say that the pen game on this album is even worse than the ones we saw in Certified Loverboy. Also, Drake seems to use the same flow again and again and again on every single fucking track over this grand hip-hop beats that sound so outdated today. This album is the definition of boring. But I will agree that it's a bit better than Certified Loverboy, mainly because it has Find Your Love and tracks like Over, which are really influential and kind of defined the sound that Drake will use in a better way in albums like Take Care. So even though this album is as fucking painful as Certified Loverboy, and actually I can enjoy a little bit more Certified Loverboy thinking of how outdated most of the songs sound on this album is definitely more important than, a really big stepping stone for Drake, thinking how this was his first album, the whole hype about this Young Money thing that was going around. So yeah, not a good album at all. This is not a good project, no matter how you look at it. But you know what? It's more important, so that's about enough for me to put it higher. Drake kind of shielded himself from critics on this album, by saying like, it's not an actual album, guys. It's not an actual album. It's just like a collection of songs. But like, even if you prepare your brain and sort of fix it to not expect much from this album, it's still a painful listen. Let's give it to Drake, okay? Let's say that, this album is messy and it brings a lot of different ideas together without trying to put them all together properly, because it's just a collection of songs. Fine, okay, you know what? I take it. But that does not explain why so many of the tracks here sound so uninspiring and fucking dead. In this album, Drake constantly tries to recreate the things that worked out on Views in terms of, popularity, because Views is also a hideous album, but we'll get to that. For example, he tries to recreate Hotline Bling on Fake Love, and he tries to recreate One Dance on multiple cuts on this album, like Get It Together with Georgia Smith, I believe it was, and also in Passion Fruit, where I think it was his most successful attempt out of all of the ones in this album. This album does have a few bangers though. For example, track Portland with Quavo and Young Thug. Really good features, really good track. And Passion Fruit as well. I've said it before, I think this album is a failure, but a good failure. Drake was trying to recreate One Dance. He couldn't do it, but actually came up with a track that's better than that fucking hideous thing. But something that you'll find really often in Drake's discography is that even if you do have some decent songs here and there, they're totally synced by this amazingly big sea of fucking hideous tracks, because we're talking about a 22 track mixtape. Even if the tracks are not that long, 22 songs is more than I ever need from a Drake project. If you're reading This Is Too Late has 17, and sometimes even that album can go a little bit too long. So yeah, better songs on this album, but it's still really bad. Now it's Views we're talking about, and even though it's at number 7, it's definitely not a low spot for this album. I do hate this album. It's the biggest flop in modern music I've ever heard in my fucking life. The previous album was wonderful. If You're Reading This Is Too Late is a great mixtape. So getting into context that a few months later this shit was released blows my mind. In this album, Drake, tries even harder to change into that R&B sound that he was trying on ever since 2009 with So Far Gone. Successfully doing it, even though I don't like the tracks, it is a fact that tracks like One Dance and Controller were massive hits in the entire world. I don't understand why everyone loves that track so much. It's so skinny and underproduced. Drake saying on that track is dead. He sounds so tone deaf. There's nothing interesting about the track. Controller at least has some decent beats, and I do believe this album has some good songs. For example, Hype, it's a good song. Grammys is a song that I kind of enjoy. But again, we're talking about a fucking massive record with almost 20 tracks, and 20 if you count Hotline Bling, if I'm not wrong. And I don't need it. There's not enough good songs in this album to make a 20 track project. Plus, in this album, Drake started to do something that kind of annoys me, and it's that Drake has always had this weird personality issue where he constantly shifts between good loving Drake and bad boy Drake, because one time Drake can be totally owned by her girl in tracks like Child's Play, and then he's talking about all sexy and all groovy in One Dance and Controller, but then you have Hype, Grammys, pop style. So who is the real Drake? Who's the one I'm supposed to talk to when I see him in person? Which is the reason why this whole light-skinned Drake meme started to appear. Because of this fucking tracks not being convincing at all. Is this album better than More Life? I don't really think so, but it's more important, it's more influential, so that's the reason why it's one spot higher. But to me, they're just the same thing. Scorpion is here, guys. This album has some pretty good bangers. You have, for example, Non-Stop. You have Nice For What. You have I'm Upset. Maybe that track is a bit too underwhelming, in order to, because it was the opening, the opening single of the album. You also have the track Final Fantasy. I don't really like the track, but I like the title, so that's good. So if I don't have such a big problem with the track list, and you have some incredible bangers in this album, why is it that I put it so low on the list? Well, because these good tracks are just buried by 25 track album. 25 Drake songs on one album. Let me say it again. There's 25 songs on this album. Have I told you that there are 25 songs on this album? Because if I haven't, there's 25 songs on this album. Who needs 25 Drake songs on an album? Especially considering the fact that this album, suffers from the same sins as every other album Drake released ever since Views, which is mixing in a really poor and horrible way light-skinned Drake with bad boy Drake. It was forgivable before, but this album was released the same year that Pusha T fucking abused Drake. So when you come out to me saying, I love a challenge, but challenged by who? I'm kind of like, you can't do that anymore. You're not allowed to make any more tough talk in your entire career. You've been fucked. At least wait like 2 or 3 years before you go hard again. No one believes. It's not convincing, it's not menacing, it's not hard, it doesn't sound good. The whole aura behind this album, it definitely, this is a darker album than the previous releases like More Life and Views, but even this sort of moody instrumentals cannot save the album from being a bloated piece of shit that goes on for way too long. Which is the reason why I've said multiple times that Drake is one of the most overrated artists of all time. There are some good tracks on this album, but for every good track you have here, you have 4 dead, fucking boring and sleepy songs that Drake delivers without any intent of giving a fuck. So yeah, this album is still not good. At number 5, we have the So Far Gone Mixtape released in 2009. I believe that Drake owns a lot of the hype behind Thank Me Later to this album, or this project. I do believe that this album is way more important than Thank Me Later in terms of, Drake's career and path as a musician. I do believe that many of the ideas here were later explored and perfected on Take Care, which is one of Drake's best projects. As an album, I think this is still way too long and, outdated as fuck. But, tracks like Best I've Ever Had and Successful are some really good bangers. Tracks that, seem to be timeless because people still to this day listen to them. It's still not a good project, but it's definitely one of Drake's most important projects. And, if I compare it to albums like Scorpion, More Life, or Certified Lover Boy, I rather listening to this all the way out. All the way. Definitely this album is better. It's more enjoyable, and it's an album that I can say that it's at least solid. Drake did a pretty good job, blending hip-hop and R&B and a little bit of pop rap too. This album has a little bit of everything that Drake went on to do on Take Care, but just in a more rudimentary and kind of an amateur way. If you want to listen to Drake's, true beginnings as, the Drake we all know today, then definitely go to this album. And, I think that this album is a bit underrated in terms of his discography. I think that not many people pay attention to this one. So go ahead, give it a try and see if you like it. Okay, now hear me out. I know that a lot of people seem to love this album. I know what this album means. I know that, for many, this was the evolution, the expected evolution after Take Care. But I just don't see why so many people like this album so much. It has some pretty good tracks, I think that Started From the Bottom is a good track. Furthest Thing is a good track, Come Through is a good track, but it also feels like for every good track we have on this album, we also have a horrible one, an annoying one, like for example this Wu-Tang song that is annoying as fuck. The opening track, Tuscan Leather, can someone explain to me what Drake was trying to do on that track? Remember the thing I said about Drake having a really serious identity issue in most of his albums? Well, this album is sort of like the perfect example of that. Because, for example, you have tracks like Worst Behavior, where Drake is trying to portray himself as this tough guy, as this bad guy that likes to break the rules, with corny ass lyrics like, for example, yo shit is like the police asking us questions. We don't know shit. Wow, so tough. I'm scared right now. And then literally right next to that track, you have From Time and Hold On, We're Going Home. What the fuck? They're not bad tracks, but it's just so weird. How do you want me to accept this tough guy persona when you're doing this in the, literally in the next track? I can't believe you anymore, Drake. I just can't trust you to be a tough guy. Stop. Don't do it anymore. I don't want to see it. Other than that, this album is quite enjoyable. I don't really have a problem with it. I'm not gonna say it's a good project. I don't think it is. I don't think we are at that point where I can say I enjoyed this albums. But definitely, if you compare it to the albums below it, this one it's way more acceptable and at least listenable, and you can have a good time while at it. But if you actually pay attention to the music you're listening to, this album is rough. Again, just give me some time to explain, and then you can dislike the video as much as you like. I know that this is probably the most generic and the least inspiring set of tracks that Drake has released ever since his first mixtape. I do know that house music and Drake don't really get along, and I do know that Drake's singing on this album is everything but on point. But honestly, do I rather listening to this album over the 1 hour plus disasters about Drake being a tough guy and a loving guy all over the place with combinations of R&B, hip hop, sometimes even pop music? Yes, I do. At least this album commits to a certain concept, and a certain genre. And if you ignore the fact that this song sound like they were produced by some amateur that is just got into college, and they're enjoyable. I like Downhill, for example, massive, although it's become a massive meme. It's sort of like he realized, okay, I cannot keep going with this narrative that I'm the toughest guy out there, so I might as well just commit to the loving light-skinned Drake. And you know what? I enjoy that more. Plus, this album isn't even an hour long. It has only 14 or 17 tracks. I don't really remember. That's another thing. This album is not really that memorable. It's the most recent release, and it's still, I still cannot get a grasp of a single melody out of this thing. We are at spot number 3, and I still don't think a single album is good or decent, but it's more enjoyable than the other ones. It's more acceptable than the other ones, and the biggest sin it commits is basically that it's really, really underproduced. It's fucking uninspiring as hell. Drake is not even trying at this point, and the production is really shallow and soulless. But that causes way less harm than, when Drake is actually trying to ruin the album. Still, this album has some questionable moments, like for example that track where the pussy is calling your name. That's a new one. And also, the track Currents, where it seems like Drake recorded some old couple's bedroom where they were fucking, because it sounds like some really old bed cringing when people are fucking in it at a really dead pace. Whoever was fucking in that bed, it's near a divorce. So yeah, number 3. I've talked about 9 albums already. I've been recording for like 40 minutes, almost an hour, and finally I get to talk about a project that I actually enjoyed. I believe Take Care is an amazing project. It's Drake's most important album, definitely the most influential one as well, the one where Drake found a balance between the light-skinned Drake and the bad boy Drake. Tracks like Headlines, The Motto, Crew Love are bangers. I fucking love those songs. I believe that his singing is better on this album too. For example, in the track Marvin's Room, that not everyone likes that song, but I believe it's a decent song, as well as the song Practice. Some really questionable and creepy lyrics on that track, but you know what? It's a good track. You have some really fire features. The Weeknd feature on Crew Love is on point. The Nicki Minaj feature on Hell Yeah Fucking Right is on point as well. And even the more emotional tracks on this album, like for example, Look at What You've Done. It's charming. It convinces me. I believe that I perceived emotion from this track, and that's more than when any other track, emotional track like Do Not Disturb, In More Life, or any other in views can say. I also believe that even though this album is again fucking huge, it's way, it feels way shorter. I believe the tracks flow really well with each other. It's not a perfect album. You again have the problem of how fluctuant the quality of the songs are in this album. You have a banger on one side and then a fucking hideous, boring and annoying track on the other side. But I'd say that for every bad track on this album, you have 2 good ones, successfully blending hip-hop and R&B together to create this really moody, sexy and sort of atmospheric tracks that it's a style that Drake tried to recreate multiple times throughout his career, and sadly he never quite did it. It's an album that I go back to quite often every time that Drake releases a new album, and I listen to this one to remind myself why did I have some sort of expectations every time that he releases something new. For Drake standards, this is a really good album. Here's the thing, when I sit to prepare one of these videos, I often take my time listening to the albums again, going back to all of the different projects, looking at the history behind the projects to see how, at what point Drake was at that certain point of his career. But still, when I sat down to do this and to organize the album and to prepare the script of what I was going to say about each release, I knew that this was going to be a number one, because this is clearly Drake's biggest victory, Drake's best W. Maybe this is not the most influential Drake album, maybe this is not the most commercially successful Drake album, but it's definitely the best one. This is banger after banger after banger after banger. You have tracks like Madonna, Legend, Jungle, one of my favorite songs from Drake. You also have Energy, Know Yourself, Six God. An amazing track list. There's not a weak song on this album. The only reason why I don't think this album is one of the best releases of 2015 is because it's a bit too linear. But, I'm willing to forgive that, because something that happened really often on Drake albums is that when he was rapping, he often used the same flow over and over again. The only thing that changed was the instrumental, and even that, even the instrumental was the same thing at the core of it. Instead, in this album, Drake has a variety of flows that he plays with throughout the whole listen. Even if you have ghostwriters on this one, even if Drake didn't write things that he said on this album, I give two fucks. Bring back the ghostwriters. Where are they? I want them again. And not only the release of this album being a massive win for Drake, but also, everything that was going on at the time. This year was amazing for Drake. He released that, that collaborative album with Future. He also bodied Meek Mill in a beef that, even though a lot of people say that the only reason he got the W was because of how weak Meek's response was. But I disagree, I think that Drake won that beef, even if it was with ghostwriters as well. I don't give a fuck. I do receive constant disappointments, This was the last good Drake album, because after this one you have Fuse, More Life, Scorpion, Certified Loverboy, Honestly Nevermind, which is 5 albums that completely make me want to kill myself every time I go through them. But I have this album. No one can take this album away from me. I have it locked. If you want to have an idea of how this album sounds, where just add one hard trap beat after the other. Drake's singing is also really good. Again, the track Jungle, go ahead, listen to that one if you like, Drake's singing. Overall, great album, definitely Drake's best album by far, and an album that kills every other competition in terms of his own discography. So, yes. That is it for today's video, guys. I really hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, go ahead and leave a like on the video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any other videos that I upload. It was really painful going back and listening to the entirety of Drake's discography, but it was worth it. I had a lot of fun doing this video. It's going to be a massive video. I don't know how long it would be after I edit this thing, but it's going through 15 minutes right now, and I don't think it's going to go down, so yeah. Leave me your own list down below as well. I want to know what you think. Which one do you think is Drake's biggest album, best album? Leave it down below. I'll make sure to check it out. With that being said, once again, I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope I can see you soon with a new video. But until then, bye.